Shabbat, Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, Boker Tov.
Good dog.
It's really terrific to see you all. How many people do we have online? I'm just wondering, maybe we can have names.
Right now, we've got about 15 people online.
Okay, beautiful. It's funny to get a sense of the size of the room. I am so happy to see all of you. It's really good to be in Romemu community and to get to study Parshat Va'etchanan with you. So I'm going to be inviting us to take a deep look at a very particular section of Parshat Va'etchanan. And if we run out of things to say, we can move on to other sections. But this, I want to explore a particular mystery that's in this parsha that has intrigued me. And maybe this feels particularly relevant to our season, to the season of Tisha B'Av, Tu B'Av, and maybe even relevant to the height of the summer, since I want to talk about darkness. I want to talk about the Arafel, the cloud of darkness, as a place that divinity dwells. We might even think of it as a word for mystery, the Arafel. So that's what I want to invite us to look at and to think about the ways that what we cannot see or what we cannot perceive, right, draws us, intrigues us, right, invites us into wonder, into imagination, and into a sense of not knowing. So I want to start with a piece of our parsha which is actually very close to the beginning. This is, I'm going to locate us sort of in the book of Deuteronomy and kind of in the Torah, right? This is part of Moses' very long, right, parshiot long farewell speech. Right, he is speaking to the people, right? He's telling them everything he wants them to know before he basically resigns as their leader, right? As it is time for him to, right? That God has told him it's time for his life to end, and he is doing a number of things, and he's exhorting them about the values and the practices that he wants them to do, and he's also recounting the history, right? He's telling them the story of what happened over the last 40 years. And one of the things that's interesting about the book of Deuteronomy is that it is really coming at the history from a different angle. Right? If you read Exodus and you read Deuteronomy, many of the events will be the same that are being told, but you'll get a different perspective. Right? Deuteronomy has a particular focus on certain things, right? A particular focus on social order and justice, and also a particular focus on the invisibility of God. Right? And we don't see this. Morning, hi everybody. We don't see this in the same way in the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, God sometimes has an outstretched hand, right? The people see God, in various ways. Deuteronomy is very strict, very machmir about the question of whether you can see God, and that probably represents some kind of other group or other stage, right, in Israelite thoughts about God. Right, and in some ways, the retelling of Deuteronomy, right, is meant, right, probably for a later generation of Israelites, right, we can maybe colloquially call them Jews, right, to sort of rethink their story. And you probably can relate to this process, right, because we do that also. Right, we take the history we've been told from earlier generations, right, and we reframe it, we rethink it, right, based on our own values or our own perspective or new things that we found out, right? We might retell, right, a particular story, the story of the Great Depression, right, or the story of the Civil War, right? We might retell those stories as we change and as we have, right, more information, or sometimes as we have less information, right? We might change our story. So this is a piece of that history that Moshe is telling. And he is beginning the parsha by talking about how God has decreed sort of the limitations of his life. Right? He says, I pleaded with Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, right, with Havaya, with the one of being at that time, saying, Right? O Lord, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, you who let your servants see the first works of your greatness and your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds, this isn't in the text yet, I'm just introducing, no God in heaven or earth can equal. Let me pray, I pray, cross over and see the good land at the other side of the Jordan. Right? So that's Moses's plea. And as it turns out, God says no. Right? God says Joshua is going to lead the people over. He then goes on to exhort people, since I won't be with you, right? I want to tell you that you should observe the Torah, the laws and instructions. And as a kind of witness, like he needs to prove to the people that they should do this, right? He's kind of worried that they're going to go over the Jordan, they're going to settle in their places, and they're going to forget all about this. They're going to forget all about the Exodus. They're going to forget all about Sinai. They're just going to be living their lives and not remember this teaching. And so he tries to evoke for them the power and the majesty of Sinai. And we have to remember that he's largely talking to people who weren't there, right? At least in the conception of the text, right? He's largely addressing people who grew up in the wilderness, right? And who either were small children at the time of Sinai or who, right, weren't there at all. And so he's trying to evoke for them a second telling. Deuteronomy actually means second telling. And its Hebrew name, Devarim, means words, right? Moshe is telling them in words, right? He's not bringing them through those actions, right? He's telling them in words. So, and he tells the story of Sinai, and this is the piece that I want to look at with you. So on your page, it's Deuteronomy 4:10. It's source 1 at the beginning of your page. Does somebody want to read the English here, maybe?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
On the day you stood before your God, Adonai, at Horeb, when Adonai said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words, in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth, and may so teach their children. More?
Yeah, please.
You came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the heart of the skies, dark with densest clouds. Adonai spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape, nothing but a voice. God declared to you the covenant that you were commanded to observe, the 10 utterances, inscribing them on 2 tablets of stone.
Beautiful, thank you. So here's his narration of Sinai, which he calls Horeb, right? Sinai has multiple names, right? Here he's using the term Horeb. So we already can see that there's a difference in the stories, right, between Exodus and here. I gather the people to me, right, that I may hear my words, that they may hear my words. Right? So this story was already told to us, right, in the story of Exodus, right? And there are a lot of similarities. Right, there is thunder and lightning. Right, we have a lot of similarities in that in that telling.
Could you expand on the rationale for the 2 names?
Sure. It's not uncommon for an important place in the Israelite geography to have more than one name. Right, because there are multiple ethnic groups among the Israelites, right? There's multiple histories. So sometimes you'll get a place like Bethel, for example, that's also called Luz, right? Or right, or or Jerusalem is also called Shalem, right? And in this case, Sinai is also called Horeb. And that might be because the same place had 2 names. It could even be, kind of from a folk tradition or critical perspective, that we're talking about 2 mountains, that there were 2 traditions about sort of where the mountain, what the mountain was called, right? And the text is trying to incorporate all of the tribal traditions in order to have legitimacy for the entire nation. So those are, we can't really know, but those are some thoughts. Like Jethro also is called Ruel. Right, and then the later tradition kind of sailed, right? Moses' father-in-law has 2 different names, right? He's called Jethro and he's called Ruel. And later on, the tradition sort of sails in and says, well, Ruel was his grandfather, and sometimes he was called by his grandfather's name, right? Because they wanted to make sense, right? But in fact, it might not make that much sense. It might be that we're dealing with different story traditions, in the way that we might tell, a myth in different ways today. Yeah. Great question. So what do you hear in this little passage that we just read? So what are some things that you notice about the way that Moses is depicting Sinai? Yeah, please.
Well, I picked up on what you said before, that there is, you heard the sound of words but perceived no shape.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading that Maimonides says God has no shape and no form.
Right.
And I like that a lot. I really go with that. I really resonate to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked that up here.
Right.
It's
So
very
the
clear.
shapelessness,
Nothing but a voice.
Yes. And it's a little bit less clear in Exodus. Like there's still no God form, but like it's not emphasized in the same way.
You can see God's backside, or
right,
his
right.
back, or his hand, or something like that.
Exactly. And here it's really being emphasized. The only way that you have connection is through a voice. So that's how Deuteronomy is telling us this story. What else is here? What else do you notice about what he's evoking for them?
Well, I'm always struck by, he's saying the day you stood before, but they weren't actually there in the physical sense. So I just always wondered about that. Like, is that supposed to, sort of the Pesach thing, like we're supposed to imagine as if we were all there, or we really were there somehow in a spiritual sense, even though we weren't there?
Yeah. Yeah, this is really great to notice. Thank you. Right, that there's it seems to be an assumption in this text. It's almost like the Passover Seder, right? He speaks to them as if they were there, but in fact, almost all of them were not there, right? So exactly, right? That there is maybe this is some kind of disjuncture within the narrative, or as you're saying, maybe this is kind of a spiritual truth that's being offered, right? Even though you weren't there in your body. Right, the community was there, right, in some way, and there's a long tradition of midrash about this, where there all the souls, right, even those who have not yet been born, right, are there at Sinai. Please.
Moses is taking himself out of the story. He's standing away from the people.
Very nice. Right. So Moses is not saying, and I went forth, from among you, and I did all these things. And he doesn't do that, right? He says God declared to us the covenant. He doesn't emphasize his role. There are a couple of reasons why that could be, right? That he does that. Did you have a thought about what his motivation might be for not emphasizing his role?
He knows that his role is ending. Mm-hmm. That's one rationale.
Right. So one possibility is he knows he's not going to be there. He can't make himself the center of this story.
Right. He is emotionally ruined by God's decision to not allow him to enter the promised land.
So this is another thing, right? That maybe he's distancing himself from this story because this is so painful for him, right? To remember that he had this role and now, right, he no longer has it, and has in some way incurred God's disfavor. That this is very, very painful.
Well, striking the rock, right?
Right. Please.
I think he's getting the Jewish people ready for a paradigm shift. They're slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years. They see the awe and wonders and taken out for Pesach, and they're in the desert. The man is coming down. They're being provided for, and now they're about to go to war, and they're going to become a farming nation, which now they're going to have to do things themselves. God is not going to be there to grant them salvation, not the salvation, I mean to feed them, and it's a big step. And Moshe, who was Ish Anav, a humble person, it's not about Moshe in my mind. It's about the Jewish people.
So I really like this idea of paradigm shift, right? That in some way, he is preparing them for a different relationship with God and with the mystery, right? And that doesn't include him in the same way, right? And it might not include, right, the kinds of miracles that they're accustomed to experiencing, right? Things are going to be in a different mode now, right? And so in some way, this story is meant to prepare them for that. I like that a lot. Thank you.
Rabbi Jill, there's two
Yeah.
hands in the Zoom room if you'd like to go to the Zoom room.
Please, folks in the Zoom room.
Let's start with Jill.
Okay, sorry I can't have my video on now. Shabbat shalom, everybody. So my comment I wanted to make is that Moses is kind of distancing himself. I think because, he maybe wants people to have the close relationship that he has with God and not have to depend on it, coming through him. And maybe they're at a, another, he sees on beyond the Peshat that they're, ready for that. And then very telling is when Joshua takes over, there's no longer those signs and wonders and all of those things. And, God tells Joshua, just remember to be strong and have good courage. So even though I don't have all these signs anymore, maybe you don't have the same strong leader. Remember that it's inside of you, and you don't have to have the signs and wonders and this leadership as strongly, because the promised land is when you find that within yourself.
So also a kind of paradigm shift of where we're going to find this presence. Great. I'll take the other three comments from the Zoom room, and then I want to show you a passage that contradicts this one. Yeah. I can't see who's there, but please go ahead.
Go for it, Jay.
Yeah, thank you. Along the lines of the paradigm shift, I'm going to be pretty prosaic here. The paradigm shift is retrograded. It's the editors and redactors who have the benefit of sort of being in the future and having a sense of where things are going, and or political decisions, who decide that, in fact, we need to kind of gracefully let Moshe transition out.
Yeah, I'm inclined to see it that way. Also, that this is also a reflection of later Israelite views in politics. And this is part of why they're retelling. It's a kind of midrash. It's part of why they're retelling the story. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Please,
Roberta.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom. I'm also just so moved to see this as Moshe is retelling his Torah, and he's getting that this really wasn't about him, and he's like reached this stage in life where he was the messenger, and he can now show up as a prophet, an absolute prophet. It's like the transition from political leader to messenger prophet, and now he's able to say to the people, I point,
we're losing you, Roberta.
Really trying to transmit. Sorry? Yeah, thank you. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, go back a sentence.
Oh, you couldn't hear?
Yeah, just go back one sentence.
That he is now transmitting to people actually the fruits of his incredible spiritual experiences, that you also, whatever I did, whatever was gifted or transmitted to me, we are all human. Don't look to another person. You too have this direct relationship.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing that team coming out, developing the new relationship.
Aluma.
Hi, Jill.
Hi.
I'm really taken with the choice of word. That it's about you stood. There could have been other ways of saying that, but the fact that they're standing, that they stood, that they were present, so that in the future they will know to stand and be present. Because to really hear and to really actively be involved in life, you need to be able to stand and be still.
Wonderful, thank you. So the sense of standing, of presence, of showing up, great.
I came in a little late, perhaps you covered it, but I have never read the Jewish study Bible, and I found it on my shelf, and I was just looking at the very beginning of it, and it says that it was a scroll discovered by King somebody in 629 before the Common Era, and I'm wondering how many hundreds of years is this after the Bible was put in its present form in the other 4 books?
So we don't really know that. We have a story in the Book of Kings, right, that tells us that King Josiah, somebody finds a scroll in King Josiah's treasury and takes it to the prophetess Huldah, who reads it and says, yes, this is a divine scroll. And this is also, if you want to read this politically, this is the authors of Deuteronomy making sure that everyone knows, right, that their book, even though it's later, is a sacred book. Certainly by the time of the first exile, right, we definitely have Deuteronomy as part of the Torah, right? The Deuteronomic history is written either in the first exile or just before.
Do we know who these people were?
No. I mean, if you're taking the perspective that it wasn't Moses, then no, we don't know who they were. Yeah. But we do know that, I mean, the Deuteronomic history includes Joshua, includes Samuel, includes Kings, right? That perspective kind of informs a number of biblical books that come later. All right, so now I want to show you another passage from later in this parsha that tells a similar story with a couple of important differences and a few important similarities. All right, so this is Deuteronomy 5:19 and forward. And is there somebody who would like to read this? Thank you.
Adonai spoke those words, those and no more, to your whole congregation at the mountain, with a mighty voice out of the fire and the dense clouds. Adonai inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me.
All right, and go on to the next page.
When you heard the voice out of the darkness, while the mountain was ablaze with fire, you came up to me, all your tribal heads and elders, and said, our God, Adonai, has just shown us a majestic presence, and we have heard God's voice out of the fire. We have seen this day that humankind may live, though addressed by God. Let us not die then, for this fearsome fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of our God, Adonai, any longer, we shall die.
Thank you. So here we have another telling. There are a few things that are different, right? And as I said, there are a few things that are the same. We still have the image of the fire and the dense cloud and the darkness, which I'm going to say a little bit more about in a moment. We have Moshe in some way putting himself into the story, right? God gave me the tablets, right? We have the tribal heads and elders in the story and the voice. And there's one other thing that strikes me. Right, in this version, we have Heranu, right? Havaya Eloheinu et kivodo. God has shown us God's glory. So this is a thing that I teach about a lot. That is a very interesting thing in the Bible, which is that, and this is very similar to the way that the Kabbalah talks about God. I think God does not have a form, but God has a thing called a kavod, right, which means a glory that can be seen. Right, and this glory appears like the pillar of cloud, right, or when the temple is dedicated by Solomon, the glory enters it, right, and people can see it. Right, so there is this visible I don't know what you want to call it, or you can call it an aura or something like that, right? There is a visible presence. Well, but you can't see consciousness. I mean, unless maybe you can see God's consciousness. I don't know. So, you want to expand? Katya, tell me. You want to say a little more about what you mean by that?
We all have a drop of God's consciousness, and it comes out in different ways. That's all.
So maybe this kavod is shared by us, which is actually something the Kabbalah is going to say, right? Is that
Definitely.
Yeah.
Made in God's image.
Nice. So anybody notice a contradiction here?
Yeah, that we may live though addressed by God, but if we hear the voice of God any longer, we should die.
Okay, that's one of them, right? Right. So what is this business about, right? We can live and right, hear God. We might die if we hear God, right? So what's that about, right? What is that contradiction about? The other thing is we can't see God. We can see God, right? We can't see God, but God can show us God's presence. Heranu. God made us see God's presence, right? So there is a contradiction there too, that might be, that maybe we can tease out a little bit, and that some of the commentators notice. I saw there was a comment online. Am I right?
They lowered their hand, but whomever it was, if you wanted to share. Oh, I think you're okay to continue, Rabbi Jill.
Okay, great, thank you. So I tracked this image because I actually really like the word of the Arafel. One of the words that's used in both of these passages that in some way to me embodies this contradiction of seeing and not seeing is this word Arafel. So there are a couple of words that mean cloud or mist in the Bible, right? There is anan, right, which is a cloud, the way we usually think about a cloud. There's an id, which means a mist. And then we also have this word arafel, which seems to mean some kind of mist that creates a sense of darkness. An opaque mist, something like that. Sometimes it's translated a thick cloud. Sometimes it's translated darkness. We don't really know, I think, what arafel actually means, but it has to do with some kind of opaqueness that is around the divine. And so I began to trace in some of the commentators and some of the other sources, like what is happening with this thing called arafel. Like one of the, so I want to look at I want to jump around, but I want to look at a few sources. So it's labeled source 2a, which is right after source 2, right after what we just read. This is from the Psalms, and you're going to recognize it if you are a fan of Kabbalat Shabbat, because this is a verse that is recited during Kabbalat Shabbat. The first Hebrew word is missing. Anan va'arafel sevivav, tzedek u'mishpat mechon kiso. Right, dense clouds are around God. Anan va'arafel, righteousness and justice are the base of God's throne. Right, so Psalms is also depicting God as being surrounded by clouds. It's almost like a thunderstorm sort of image, right? That there's a thick cloud. And the cloud, here's the interesting thing about the cloud. This is how the cloud can embody the paradox. The cloud both obscures and makes it visible. Right? It obscures because you can't see what's in it. It makes visible because you know that because the cloud is there, that the thing that is making the cloud is there.
Yeah. The other day there was a thunderstorm.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed before the thunderstorm, the world grew very dark. Mm-hmm. Manhattan grew very dark, and it was a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was until the first rumble of thunder, and then you say, "Oh, it's a thunderstorm." But before that rumble, it's like the end of the world. Just a couple of days ago. Yeah. So maybe it's that kind of darkness that comes before a thunder.
Yes, and I actually love that you're suggesting this because one of the things I like to think about these texts is that they are conveying embodied experience. Right, so in some way that experience of being in the darkness and the thick cloud of a thunderstorm, right, might have did inform, right, this experience of God, right? This is what it's like to be in God's presence. It's like being in the presence of a thunderstorm, right? That it's beautiful, it's awe-inspiring, it's a little scary. That makes a lot of sense to me.
But it's both clouds and fire.
Yes, and that is exactly what the commentators are going to jump on. How can it be both? How can it be dark and light at the same time? Right? How can there be? Right. I mean, it makes sense from I think from a sensory point of view if we think about it as a lightning storm. Right? That there's the thick clouds, right, and there's also the fire. Right? That makes sense. Right? But some of the Jewish philosophers feel that this is contradictory. Right? They say, how can it be dark and light at the same time?
Or what is it about God's presence that demand
that.
it to be so?
Yes, great. So I want to look at two commentators on this exact point. The first one is the Bechor Shor, who's this is in your source 3, who's a commentator from 12th century France, and somebody I like a lot. I like the way that he thinks about the Torah. And he's commenting on Choshet Anan va'arafel, right? This from our Parsha, right? Darkness, cloud, and thick cloud. And right, Scripture says that these surround God, Sevivav, right? Just like in the Psalm, these are what surround God. And it's not a contradiction, he says. That in one place it says burning with fire to the heart of heaven, and in another it says darkness, cloud, and thick cloud surround him. For you are not able to say you saw there any image. Right? So he seems to be saying, right, that the people could not see an image, that's the darkness part. Right? But they could see this fire, right? And that's the visible part, right? That both of those things were happening at the same time. Right? And then he says, and the words were written on tablets of stone, a thing that cannot decay, in order that the word should persist. And in order that there should be a memory, right, a permanent memory, right, of this experience, right, this ephemeral experience. Right, and then he says, and you shouldn't forget this, right, because this is the essence of faith. So I want to immediately go to the next commentator, who's making a similar point in some ways in a clearer way. So this is Hizkuni. He's also a French commentator. These folks are all in the tradition of Rashi. And the mountain was ablaze with fire to the very heart of heaven, right? Darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. Again, right, comment on our Parsha, right? What is this experience of darkness, cloud, and arafel? Ve'im tomar pasuk ze rosho machish et sofo. And if you were to say the beginning of this verse contradicts its end, right? How could it be ablaze with fire and covered in darkness at the same time? Right? And then he says, right, for how can a thing burning with fire have darkness obscure it? Ketzad davar bo'er ba'esh ein choshech shalet sham. Right? If something is burning in fire, no darkness can reign there. Right? It couldn't be, right, that there could be fire and then also darkness. And then he says this great thing. He says, Ella shnehem shamshu ke'echad. Rather, the two of them served as one. Right, or in the words of this translator, right, darkness and light coexist. Right, they were both providing their service, and both of those elements are providing their service in that moment. They exist at the same time. Right, the darkness and light exist together. Right, they are both a way of making God manifest. Right, the light and the darkness. Right, Moses is explaining what took place. He says, God spoke to you out of the fire. What you heard were the sounds of God's voice, but you saw no image because of the darkness, cloud, and thick cloud that were there, for no human being has permission to see the image of God. So you can see that the Bechor Shor is saying, again, something very subtle. You saw the fire, right? You saw the cloud, but you didn't see the image. Right, you saw in some ways the residue of the divine presence, right? But you didn't see its essential form, right? But you saw its surroundings. And this surroundings is what eventually the rabbis of the Talmud and then the Kabbalists are going to call the Shekhinah, right? This sort of tangible emanation of the divine, right? That extrudes into the physical world.
Is that different from the kavod, or is that the same thing?
It's the same. I think it's the same, right? The word kavod Adonai is what the Talmud will translate as the Shekhinah.
Because if you could see him, it would be idolatry, wouldn't it?
Well, I think there's a contradiction, right? Because there are ways that Jewish tradition wants to see and ways that we don't want to see, right? That we don't think we should see, right? Those things, in some way coexist in weird ways, right? But that you're naming the problem, right? Right? That of this sort of Jewish concern, right, about imaging, right? Yeah.
I like to like view this as when you look at a flame, the hottest part of the flame, or like a candle burning, is the middle, which is clear. That's the essence of God. The Shekhinah that you're saying that comes out from afterward is the flame. It's guarding what's really pure.
Nice. Sefer HaBahir kind of looks at it that way. This also, interestingly, also 12th century France, looks at it this way and says that the Shekhinah is a way that humans can perceive God safely, right? That essence, right? God can't just suddenly expose the essence of the divine to mortal beings, because that would be bad. That would kind of, torch us, right? But there can be a kind of intermediary experience, right? That in Sefer HaBahir calls the bat, the daughter, but it's the same kind of thing, right? It's it's a mediating sort of halo entity, right? That allows people to experience the divine in a less intense way, right? Or in a way that is more appropriate for physical beings. Yeah.
Well, Daniel Matt said that Shekhinah is the feminine part of God.
Yes, one of the feminine parts of God. Yeah.
Put that in.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And that's actually one of the ways that they differentiate these parts of God is by gendering them. Right, this part is male, this part is female, right? That's a way that they kind of make that distinction, right? Is that this part of the divine gets feminized and depicted as, right, the Shabbat bride, for example.
The Hebrew word that is translated as image, what other English words could happen out of that Hebrew word?
Right. So it says, Shomim u'tmuna einchem ro'im. You did not see a tmuna. Right? A tmuna is a picture. Right? A tmuna is like a picture. Right? An artist's picture or even a photograph, right? Could be a tmuna.
So it's a reflection of something else. An image
we could say it's not an essence, right? It's a tmuna. It's an image.
It's an image. It's something that's not God.
Right.
It's some other.
Right, and you didn't see that. It's precisely what they were saying. Is you didn't see a tmuna. You didn't see an image that you could resolve into something clear.
I would say the opposite. That humans. I mean, this to me is contradictory, because that is exactly what we do have permission to see, is the image. We are not allowed to see the essence.
Aura. We're trying to see the aura.
Right. But to
not
make
the image,
yes.
aura.
But to make a tmuna, right, in the Ten Commandments, right, is a problem. Right, to make a tmuna, specifically they use the word tmuna, right, to make a depiction. It's almost like an artistic depiction, right, to make what does this look like to me, right? How can I make this concrete? How can I make it resolve into something?
There's another available opposite there, though.
Yes.
Because to say what you saw was no picture, what you saw was no image. If you look at that platonically, or you can say you didn't see the representation, you actually saw the thing itself. Like, not that you saw nothing, but you saw the thing.
Yes.
You saw through the veil, not through a glass darkly, if you take it to Psalms.
Beautiful.
So,
So if you see it that way, right, that what you saw here was essence and not image, right, if you choose to read it that way, then I would say the thing here that is closest to that would be the Arafel, right, would be this thick darkness, right, that's the, and we might then take the word Arafel to not even be, because a nun would be sufficient for a cloud, right, if we wanted to say, right, that God was obscured by a cloud, we could say a nun, and that would be sufficient, right, but if we say also Arafel, right, what does that add? And what is what is added by the word Arafel? So we might say the darkness, right? That it's a dark cloud, But we could also say maybe Arafel is not even a physical thing, right? Maybe in some way that we should translate this word as mystery, right? That there's something unseeable, or that is perhaps seeable, right? There's the unseeable seeable, or something like that.
Just a Hebrew question.
Yeah.
The darkness that shows up in Genesis, what's the word?
Choshech. Choshech, which appears here also. Choshech, Anan, v'Arafel, right? Darkness, cloud, and Arafel, whatever Arafel is. Yeah.
Is Arafel always used in conjunction with the word Anan?
Well, I'll show you one place where it isn't, which is interesting. So if you go to your source 7, it is often, but there's a place where it isn't. Although actually it is here too, but they're not exactly next to each other. So this is 1 Kings, and this is where Solomon is dedicating the temple. And he makes a speech. The priests bring in the Ark of the Covenant, and Solomon welcomes it. It's kind of a big dedication moment. You know, they bring the Ark into Jerusalem. And there's nothing inside the Ark but the 2 tablets of stone. And then at the end, there is a miraculous event, right? When the Ark is brought into Jerusalem, right? And the Ark has been living in other cities, right? The Ark has been in Shiloh, right? The Ark has been in different places. And now the Ark is coming to live in Jerusalem. You know, if you want to look at this politically, right? The people are centralizing, right? Instead of the Ark being something that's shared by the tribes, it's now being brought to the king's city. You know, we're having kind of a, depending on your political views, you may like this or you may think this is a terrible idea. Right? And according to the story, right, there's a miracle, right? And the cloud fills the temple. So it says, "V'lo yachlu hakohanim." This is 3 lines from the bottom in the Hebrew. "La'mod l'shareitim bnei ha'anan." And the Kohanim could not stand to minister because of the cloud. And so this is a tangible cloud. They can't go in because God's cloud is filling the place. Ki malei kavod Adonai et beit Adonai. So there's that word kavod again, right? But the kavod Adonai is filling the temple. So this is a tangible thing. It's not only visible. It's like a holodow. It's like you can't occupy its space, right? Az Amar Shlomo. So then Shlomo said this little poem, which is probably older than the text that we have here. Adonai Amar Lishkon Ba'arafel. God said, or God intended to dwell in the Arafel. Right. So here we have this sort of mysterious word, right? That Bano Baniti Beit Zevel Lach. Right, I have now built for you, a beautiful house, a stately house, a place where you may dwell forever. So the shrine is specifically associated with the Arafel. Right, it's like the tangible presence. If you've ever gone to a sacred place of great power and felt it, or some people feel this in the forest, right, or the desert, right? There's a sense, right? There's a sense of thick presence. Right, we might associate that perhaps with, we're going to kind of metaphorize this a little bit.
I love your use of the word mystery.
Yes.
Because that's both inner and outer.
Yeah, I like that, I think, as a word here. And I found a source called the Kitzur Baal HaTurim, who says that the numerical value, the gematria of Arafel, is equivalent to the word Shekhinah. So I thought that was fun. I thought that was really nice, right? That kind of ties it all together, right? Yeah.
I see from a Kabbalistic point of view the necessity for the fire and the darkness. Just like the necessity for good and evil, the necessity to have chesed and gevura. It's the fire and the darkness is like the chesed and the gevura, which is the necessity for the balance to maybe come to bear.
Nice. I really like what you're saying about balance. One of the things that I find powerful about this text is that often, in certain philosophical systems, right, we have a tendency to say darkness and light and associate light with the good things that we want, right, and darkness with the things that we don't want. right? And in fact, this text is not doing that. Right? This text is not saying, right, light is where God is and darkness is where God is not. Right? For this text, it is both light and darkness, right, that are harbingers of God's presence. Right? Both of those things, right, are ways that we see God. So I wanted to turn to a contemporary thinker, Rabbi Fern Feldman, who some of you might know of. This is in your source 9. And Feldman writes about something called endarkenment, which she uses as a kind of cognate to enlightenment, right? Where she talks about endarkenment, like the ability to receive this wisdom of darkness. And she says the following: the experience of the Israelites at Mount Sinai took place in the shadow of the mountain. Shortly before the 10 speakings, right, the 10 utterances, the 10 commandments, are given, Exodus 19:7 states that they stood at the underside of the mountain. The Talmud tells the following midrash. Rabbi Abdimi Bar Chama said the verse implies that the Holy One overturned the mountain upon them like an inverted casket, and said to them, if you accept the Torah, it is well. If not, your grave will be right here. Right? Some of you might know this story, right? That God held the mountain over them. I don't particularly love this story. Right. Commenting on this, the Pesikta de Rav Kahana says, Israel accepted the Torah that was given out of darkness. So the Midrash sort of takes this story and makes it into something else, right? And he says, the point of the mountain was not to terrify them. The point of the mountain was to produce the darkness. The Torah was given out of darkness, that is the darkness of the shadow where they were standing, because the mountain was being held over their heads. At this point, the Torah relates that the people experienced thunder, lightning, dense cloud, right, that's the Arafel, shofar blast, smoke, and the shaking of the mountain, and then they heard the divine revelation. The Israelites then become too fearful to continue the intensity of this encounter, and they ask Moses to go on alone. The Torah tells us that the people stood at a distance, and Moses came near the thick darkness, the Arafel, where God was. Moses entered into the darkness where God was, that is, into the unseen, invisible, incorporeal, and archetypical essence of existing things. Thus he beheld what is hidden from the sight of the mortal nature. Right here, this is a quote from Philo, right, the ancient Jewish philosopher. And in himself and his life displayed for all to see, he has set before us, like some well-wrought picture, a piece of work beautiful and godlike, a model for those who are willing to copy it. Happy are they who imprint that image in their souls. So Philo is talking about the image of the archetypal essence, right, the essence that cannot be seen. Right? The Torah was given in the darkness because it gave Moses the experience he needed to transmit the Torah, which is itself a pathway back to the essential darkness. This is almost like the primordial darkness, right? The darkness before creation. Rabbi Menachem Mendel, the 19th century Kotzker Rebbe, comments in his book Emet ve'emunah that the Arafel is the essence, the Ikar, and the innermost part, the Panimiyut, and that is why the divine presence was there. Right, so this actually fits with what some of you were saying about the essence being perceived, but not the picture, right? But the essence. The Kotzker Rebbe says that the Arafel is in fact the essence, right? Is the Ikar, right, of the divine presence. It is the innermost part, right? This is exactly what some of you were saying. Right, and in medieval rabbinic authority, Jacob and Asher comments on Exodus 20:18, Arafel, in numerological equivalents, gematria, the divine presence, Hashekhinah. That is, he equates the thick darkness that Moses entered to receive Torah with the divine presence itself. So at the time of the giving of the Torah, Moses and the Israelites were both having experiences of the sacred dark. So this is a thing that I wanted to bring to us in this, sort of for this parsha. You know, as this parsha is in its various ways trying to give us an experience of the divine, right, that is sensory, but also not. This notion of the sacred dark. And particularly at this time when, I don't know about you, but I crave shadow. You know, I go out in the sun and I'm, you know, if I happen upon some shade, I'm very happy. You know, what would it mean to honor the sacred dark? Right, in the way that we honor, right, in the way that we honor light at Hanukkah, right, or on Shabbat, like what would it mean to honor the sacred dark? And so this is a question I wanted to bring.
And openness.
And openness. So an openness and not knowing. I love that. That's beautiful.
We have a passage from Audrey Lorde.
Yes.
Interprets it very well, I think. Where is that?
That's right before Firm Felton. Right.
Yes.
Audrey Lorde is particularly talking about darkness in relation to the feminine. If you want to read it, you can.
Yes, these places of possibility within ourselves are dark because they're ancient and hidden. They have survived and grown strong through darkness. Within these deep places, each one of us holds an incredible reserve of creativity and power, of unexamined and unrecorded emotion and feeling. The woman's place of power within each of us is neither white nor surface. It is dark, it is ancient, and it is deep.
Thank you. Now, I would say we could probably extend that to everybody, right? That we all have these places of depth, right? That that have a darkness to them, and that we could think of that as a really powerful.
Going back to creation, darkness is older than light. It is there first.
Nice.
Like darkness is on the face of the deep. There it is. Then light is created.
Yes.
So there's a succession there. But you're inviting us into another paradox because, and this has always bothered me in the first passage of Genesis, where first light is created, but then it's divided from darkness. It's a two-step process, which implies that at one point darkness and lightness are indivisible.
Yes.
Or one in substance. So there's darkness and then there's lightness, but there's still one thing, and then the lightness has to be divided from the darkness.
Yes.
Which is a very strange and fascinating process.
It's almost like the Arafel. It's like a bright darkness, right?
Yes.
Something like that. Rashi actually says this. He says that in the time of creation, darkness and light can coexist. Right? That in our world, when we light a candle, the darkness goes away. But that in the primordial world, like light and darkness can exist at the same time.
And what's the implication of that coexistence?
Yeah, I think this is such a good question. I mean, we might say, right, that we experience light and darkness as separate because of the way that we see, right? We have a particular, vision. We have a particular biology, right, that causes us to see light and dark, and in the ways that we see them, right? But in fact, right, in space, there's light and darkness, right? I guess what I would say is that there's something about this perspective that is like the divine perspective. Like it's not a human perspective where we use eyes, right? But it's a different kind of seeing. Yeah.
A friend of mine who's a devotee of Wittgenstein is exploring the question of can there be reddish green? And he comes to the conclusion that we, in our language game, cannot perceive reddish green, but it could exist through some other kind of perception.
So there are things that we are shaped by how we perceive, but we do not own the sum total of perception, right? I see a comment online, and I'll come to you. Jessica. Jessica.
Hi. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Such a beautiful conversation, and it reminds me that, it's that we honor the sun, but we also honor the moon, and the divine feminine shows up at night. At night is when we dream, and dreams bring light. And if we can enter the endarkenment, we can reach enlightenment through dreams and through the things that can only happen in the shadows. And I think because of our world is so skewed towards light and towards, light that can almost grow into toxic positivity, always light, always bright, that we're taught a little bit, or as a child, to fear the dark instead of to kind of dive into it with us and embrace.
I like the feeling of diving into it. There's something about dark that feels tangible, right? Like if you're in a dark room, there's almost something that feels like you could touch it. Like that's what the tradition says about the plague of darkness on Egypt, was that it was tangible darkness. There's kind of a substance to it, or feels that way. Yeah.
So I was thinking that last night when I lit the candles, the room was dark. And of course the candles gave a wonderful light, but all around the light was darkness. So at the same time, you know, it's like a metaphor for what you're saying. On a physical level, you can have the darkness and the light at the same time.
Beautiful.
When you first asked the question, I was, where I went was kind of nothingness. And the power of going there, and also this kind of void, and that brought me to silence.
Nice.
So,
yeah. Well, that is something that mystics try to reach, right? Is the sense of void, right? The sense in which we are transparent, right? We are transparent to the mystery, right? There is the desire to get to that place of the nothing, right? That's what the Kabbalists call the ayin, right? The part of God that is so different from the rest of being that we could call it the I am, we could call it the nothing. Wow. You know, and it's a little bit like thinking, I mean, I'd like to think about it in relationship to physics, right? That a lot of us is empty space, and a lot of us is nothing. And, you know, in some way the philosophers are intuiting, right? We think that we're real, but there's actually, there's actually a complication to that realness, right? We are also nothing. And there's a release into that, right? Because we hold our awareness so fiercely, there's a release into, right? I'm just a wave in the ocean, right?
It's like Emerson's weird aspiration to be a transparent eyeball. He says that's the ultimate thing we can imagine ourselves being, because the transparent eye takes in everything but holds nothing. And everything passes through it. It's a total awareness, but kind of zero attention, zero desire to hold.
Yeah, nice.
So it's another way of saying what you're saying.
Beautiful.
And following that, there must always be the ability to perceive. There is no void because we're perceiving the void. The darkness is perceivable, and therefore perception must precede darkness.
The way that the Sefer Yetzirah puts it, right, is that there are three inherent realms of being: space, time, and what Sefer Yetzirah calls nefesh, which means the body, soul, which means perception, right? It means the person, the story, the entity, right? And so this is also a question that physicists are dealing with, right? Of how is the perceiver enmeshed in what is perceived, right? Enmeshed in the space and time that we perceive, right? Can we even separate those things, right? Which is, I think, similar to what you're saying.
And I think the answer is no. I mean, that's what Heisenberg was getting at, is that the perception itself is a force.
Rabbi Jill, you've got another comment on Zoom if you'd like to shift.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I think I'm going to be the voice of what I perceive as the shadow, which is the darkness of the pain of the emotions that we don't witness in one another. And I know we can get mystical about darkness, and we can get very, divine, whatever paradigm shift about darkness. But the paradigm shift is dark and dirty. It's how do we stay with each other when we are in pain and are in rage? And how do we hold those emotions tenderly in ourselves without shaming ourselves? We're shaming each other. And I don't think as a species we've gotten there yet, because we're still afraid of dark emotions, but we talk about darkness. So I'm the voice for how do we hold space for grief and rage. And we have to, and I believe that only God consciousness can help us transmute the grief and rage and have the paradigm shift that we're looking for. Whether it's in Israel or with Trump or with Biden, everywhere we turn, there's this avoidance of transmutation of dark emotions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think you're right about us needing to hold difficult emotions. What I would say is that we don't have to call them dark emotions. There's a reason why we call them dark emotions. It's because our culture doesn't like the dark, right? So I would just say, I know lots of us use that language, and I'm not telling you you can't, right? But I am saying, right, that there's a reason why we associate difficult emotions with the dark, right, and joyful emotions with the light. That being said, I think what you're saying is very important, right? Which is that what we cannot see or what we choose not to see, right? Which may be another reason why we use the phrase darkness, right? Can really cause pain, right? It can cause people not to feel seen, right? Or can cause us to act in ways where we're not conscious about the ways that we're acting.
But people make love in the dark.
Right, all right, right, I love this, okay. Right, so dark is also good, right? What do we do in the dark? We have intimacy in the dark, right? We sleep in the dark, we have dreams in the dark, as Jessica said, right? We might expand the ways that we use, right, the terms dark and light. And I think we have to end, so I'm gonna end there. Wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
May you find moments of light and moments of dark.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Joe. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. So beautiful.
Were you in the flames or?
It was hot.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, what a community, huh? So beautiful. All our voices.
And
Eden, can you mute the room? Thank you.
Carol's iPad, is that Tony?